What is up, guys? Frosty Aussie 0232 here today for another Frosty Features. Today, in lieu of the new character coming into Marvel Strike Force, who might have could have been a reskin, but whatever, who kind of is just a reskin, but with a whole different kit, we have Thor Infinity War. And since I didn't have the ability to do a Thor video because he was in the game at the beginning and I wasn't, we're just gonna do Thor in general. Thor, Odin's son, today to cover it all. For those of you who haven't been here, this is a comic book background on the toons that you use in Marvel Strike Force. So, the way this works, especially with a character like Thor, the multiverse is vast, and in the case of Thor, we are sticking to Marvel 616 canon. We are not diverging into other universes. So just keep that in mind as we move forward. Here we go. According to Scopely, after the destruction of Asgard, Thor set out on a mission to find a new weapon to defeat Thanos and prevent him from acquiring all of the Infinity Stones. Along the way, he teamed up with Rocket and Groot of the Guardians of the Galaxy and traveled to Nidavellir. I forget how that's pronounced. Let's go. Nidavellir it is. To forge a new weapon, Stormbreaker. Thor ultimately arrives in Wakanda to join the Avengers in the final battle against Thanos, where he delivers a powerful blow to the villain with his new weapon. Woot woot. Haha. So, obviously Thor Infinity War is based solely off of the movies. That's why it's Infinity War, so it's really hard to actually judge this as I normally do. All I can point out is differences between the MCU and the comics, which I will do at the end. But that's the description they have given for Thor Infinity War. Alright. But for us, this is Thor, Odin's son, in his original beautiful glory. Alright, so, name, Thor, Odin's son. He has been around for many moons. First appearances in Venus number 11 in 1950, where this is a comic where we are introduced to multiple different mythology gods. So Thor isn't exactly a main character, but this is where he's first introduced, and then we start to see him a lot more following up, mainly in the 60s with the Avengers. Powers and abilities. So, Thor has a lot, and these are some of the ones I found most pertinent and important to point out, but Thor he's been around for a long time, and he has a lot of powers. Kind of dependent on the plot, but so I put God. Typically, I put people written as superhuman. He is beyond that of a superhuman, so he's like a super Asgardian, right? He's a god. Asgard. So there's humans that we are our durability that we know in real life, and then there's Asgardians who are more durables, fast, strong, etc. than humans. Thor is a god of the Asgardians, so if it's superhuman, he's super Asgardian, right? So he is even stronger than 90% of Asgardians, etc., right? So that is really important. So when I put God, it's superhuman, super Asgardian plus. He is super mega strong, super mega fast, etc., right? He's another level past superhuman. Weather control, obviously, God of Thunder. He can control the weather, uses lightning attacks all the time. Energy manipulation, he can focus his energy into different forms and use them, be them beams, typically bolts of lightning that we see. He does have forms of telepathy. He uses this to contact Heimdall and Odin quite often, but it is limited. It's not kind of all over like a huge strength he has, but it is something that most people don't think about, so I want to point out. And he has many other powers, flight, stuff, so just be aware. Thor has a lot of powers. Really depends on which Thor you're reading, when you're reading him, if it's a Thor from the future or the past, etc. If he has his hammer, if he has Yarnborn, if he has Stormbreaker, it all changes, right? So with that, we're going to talk a lot about Asgardian weapons today. Just to point out, Asgardian weapons are a channel to to filter a power through, right? So they don't inherently, they do carry powers, but for the people that they're originally made, they are made to channel their powers to make them more focused, right? So Just a really important thing to remember. So if I were to pick up Mjolnir, I do get the powers of Thor, but I am not necessarily as powerful as Thor with the hammer, because Thor is channeling his powers where I would be channeling powers from Thor, if that makes sense. But that's how most Asgardian weapons work. So when we talk about them moving forward through this Frosty feature, just keep that in mind. Yeah. Aliases: Donald Blake, Jake Olsen, many more. I added Donald Blake and Jake Olsen because they're two of the major ones. There's a bunch. So typically what happens is Thor becomes unworthy of the hammer and Thor gets sent to Earth. And in that process, he either becomes somebody who didn't exist before, or there is somebody that existed, but they're dead in a coma in a different dimension, and Thor kind of takes on their personality, or Thor kind of uses them as like an avatar. Think of like Moon Knight the show or something like that, where he uses as an avatar Eric Masterson, and all of a sudden they can turn into the form of Thor or become Thor himself, right? So there's a bunch of ways like this. There's a bunch of people like that. So Thor has a lot of aliases. Yes. Affiliations, once again, a lot. Typically we see him in the Avengers, different versions of the Avengers all the time. The Heralds, the God Squad. We talked about God Squad a few times in the Frosty feature. We talked about the Heralds. Yes, that means Thor was a Herald of Galactus. Super cool storyline. Check that out. And more. Mainly, though, different versions of the Avengers. Who died? Well, Thor died. So, as a child, King Laufey, the king of the Frost Giants, you could see him in the first Thor movie, assassinated him, but due to the fact that we're going to talk about his birth, but due to Thor's birth, he had a there was a midwife in Thor's birth, and it was actually the Phoenix, like Phoenix Force Phoenix, like Jean Grey. It was the Phoenix was his midwife, and so when Laufey assassinated Thor, she brings Thor back to life, making him even stronger than he was before. So Laufey attempted to assassinate this kind of Prince of Asgard, but then made him much stronger, which also eventually leads us to Thor himself, because you can't be a superhero without somebody dying, and how super are you if it's you that died? Damn, wrong computer. Background. Here is where things get a little wild, right? Background is he's an Asgardian god, so he's born on Asgard, he's born to Asgard, but he's not fully Asgardian. So as everybody, he's half Asgardian god. So he's born of Gaia and Odin. So he's half Asgardian god, half Elder god, as Gaia is an Elder god, which makes him, as far as Asgardian gods go, he's even stronger because of his Elder background. But he is raised in Asgard, and he is raised with the idea that Freya is his mother, which is what we see in the MCU as Freya is his mother. He thinks that's his mother, and then he runs into the Phoenix, and the Phoenix is like, I'm actually your mom. And then it turns out, oh no, I was lying the whole time. It was Gaia, who is the Elder god of Midgard, which is Earth. So this gives Thor an inherent want to protect Earth because of his Elder God situation. And he was actually reared like this because Odin wanted to try to, he wanted to make a superior offspring. So even though he was married to Freya, he straight up did the thing with the Midgard situation, and just to make a stronger offspring that would want to protect the Earth. And he got what he wanted. He did exactly that. And then Freya actually just accepts Thor with open arms, right? So that's pretty crazy. Various Thor. So one thing that I think is really important to point out is that with most versions of with a lot of gods and most versions of Asgardians, other people can become them or take their mantle on or whatever, and it has something to do with being able to host a mythology, I believe. So just to throw it out there, some people who have become, so there's a lot of people that have wielded Mjolnir, but only some of them have become Thor, like have actually gotten the total title and what it is that it comes together. So we have people like Red Norrell, Beta Ray Bill as Thor for an extended period of time. Eric Masterson, very famously as Thor for a very long time. And then, of course, Jane Foster more recently are people that have become Thor. Red Norrell, he is... he was a documentarian that went to Asgard to like make this documentary about how Asgard works or whatever, and he falls in love with Sif, and then ultimately Odin puppet masters some stuff, and he's like, oh, Red Norrell can pick up this hammer and he can become Thor, and he's gonna beat Thor in a fight. And so him and Thor fight over the affection of Sif. Red beats the crap out of Thor, and he's like, yeah, and then Odin's like, great, now go fight the serpent. The serpent is a giant monster, giant like dragon type. It's this giant snake that lives in Earth's oceans, and it's so big it can wrap around the earth, and it's super crazy. And in prophecy, it's supposed to kill Thor. He's supposed to kill Thor. So Odin creates a new Thor that can die for Thor, Odin's son. So Odin does a lot of messed up stuff, as most chief gods do in mythology and Marvel. That's one of them. Beta Ray Bill, he's a Corbinite. He famously is the one with Stormbreaker, not Thor, right? Beta Ray Bill holds Mjolnir for a short period of time, ends up getting it back to Thor, and as a more or less a reward for being able to wield Mjolnir the way he did, Thor gives him Stormbreaker, right? So Beta Ray Bill is famously actually the one with Stormbreaker, but in the MCU it's Thor for some reason. Eric Masterson, he especially when I was growing up, he's in some of the shows, but that's when you see Thor as a regular person, and then he like raises his hand in the air and he gets struck by lightning, he turns into Thor. That's typically who you see as Eric Masterson. He ends up becoming Thunderstrike after Thor returns. Thor dies. He's gone for a long time. That's when Eric Masterson comes around, and then he comes back. He gets Mjolnir back, and he gives him a I can't remember if it's a mace. He gives him a mace called Thunderstrike, and then Eric Masterson goes by Thunderstrike. So that is another hero that we could theoretically see in Marvel Strike Force, which is pretty cool. Midnight said He-Man knockoff. Exactly that. And then we have Jane Foster. We covered her in Jane Foster Thor, the Mighty Thor in Frosty Feature. So check that out, and you can get that kind of rolling. Okay, so I want to talk a little bit about Thor's weaknesses. Thor is incredibly powerful, but Thor has a few different types of weaknesses. So after some of the basic ones, after Thor gets the Odin Force, so what we see in Thor Ragnarok in the MCU is him being able to use the Odin Force. That's him when he figures out he can use powers without the hammer, and he can be super strong without the hammer. That's him using the Odin Force, right? So he also, when having the Odin Force, after using it for a long time, he has to essentially hibernate, which is called the Odin Sleep, to recharge his powers. And that's really important, and it's very easy to get to him when he's in this kind of hibernation status, right? So that's important to note. The Warrior's Madness. Asgardians all inherently have this sort of this switch they can flip off, and what they do is on the battlefield they kind of switch off their morals, etc., and it increases their strength, it increases their endurance, whatever, and they essentially get this bloodlust and they start killing kind of indiscriminately, and it's really crazy. But it's the longer they're within it, the more it kind of chisels away at their insanity. So Odin has placed like a don't use this situation on him, and you can get banished for using it, and that's one of the many times Thor gets banished from Asgard. That's where we see alcohol. I also want to point, because we always talk about us as the Marvel community. Everybody always talks about Tony Stark's alcohol problems. Thor has really bad alcohol problems, and it's always a plot point, and I find it really interesting because it doesn't sound as severe as it does with Tony Stark, and maybe it's because Thor is not human. Thor has an extremely high resilience to alcohol, but he quite likes it, and it's very often a plot point that something happens and Thor goes into a drunken stupor for an extended period of time. We see this in Endgame, Avengers Endgame, where you get people call him Fat Thor or Bro Thor or whatever. You see this a little bit, but there's storylines like Avengers Reborn, where Heroes Reborn, where somebody was trying to take. I'm not going to give it away, but somebody was trying to take Thor out of the game. So what they did was just give him a horn that never empties of beer, and he drinks for like centuries or whatever, right? So just as a reminder, Thor actually does have a bit of a weak spot for alcohol, which is kind of interesting. Okay, so we always talk about relationships. So with Thor, he's related to a lot of people, so I didn't want to go through it, so I just went through some of that are a little bit more important. Or Odin and Jord being Gaia, are Odin Bjornsson and Jord are his parents, so Asgardian god and Elder god. And then Frigga being his stepmother, so being the person that actually like raises him, etc. Thor has 8 half siblings. There's a bunch. The most notable things within these 8 siblings. Number 1 is Angela. Those of us who play Marvel Snap, she's a pretty fun card in Marvel Snap. Angela, she's part of a 10th dimension, and it's a whole crazy situation. But Angela is a really cool, very strong sister of his. Another really important note is Hela in the comics is not Thor's sister. Just throwing it out there. So Hela actually is not related to Thor. So those are the 2 things I want to put in there. And then there's Cole Bjornsson, which is his uncle, whose villain name is the Serpent. So this is Odin's brother. This is Odin's older brother. I think you can see where that's going. Royalty and such. Notable events. So, Fear Itself. Fear Itself is a really fun, I believe I've spoken about it before in Frosty Features. We're going to hit it again today just because it's been a while. So Fear Itself is a storyline in which we find that Red Skull's daughter, Sin, is going through Antarctica, and she finds an Asgardian hammer that has fallen from Asgard, which fell due to some of Red Skull's experiments in World War II, but they weren't quite aware of it. So she picks up her name being Cynthia, which is a horrible S-I-N, Thea. Good job, Red Skull. That's what happens when you're a Nazi and you have kids. You come up with stupid names. Cynthia, it's only stupid because of the sin part. I'm sorry. Anyway, so she becomes Sin. The daughter of Red Skull finds this hammer that it's the Hammer of Scotty, I think is what it's called. But ultimately, she picks up this hammer and she becomes this kind of bad Asgardian dude, Scotty, and brings brings the serpent back to life. The serpent not being the actual dragon that is prophesied to kill Thor, but this character that is Odin's brother, Cole Bjornsson. So brings the serpent back to life. The serpent's all weak and stuff, but he's old like Odin. So the first thing he does is he sends these hammers out to all these different characters that then become these different versions of these kind of evil Asgard situations, because his goal is to take back Asgard. And also he proclaims the prophecy in which all of Asgard is supposed to fall to the serpent, etc., and that will kill Thor, is actually me, not the actual serpent. Here we are. And so he sends out these hammers, and these hammers essentially go and come to these different heroes, and as they grab them, they get possessed by these different people. So our different characters that get these are the Thing. We already have Sin, she has one, and then the Thing, Hulk, Juggernaut, Atuma, Grey Gargoyle, Absorbing Man, and Titania all get these hammers, and their only goal is to create havoc and spread fear throughout the world, which empowers Serpent. And in that, Serpent uses his powers to make himself young again so that he can more efficiently work. And Odin sees this happening, and Odin's like, oh hell no. So Odin's response is to be like, everybody get back to Asgard, shit's going down. And so everybody returns to Asgard, and he's like, we need to get in a war state. We're gonna make sure nobody leaves. We're all gonna be ready for this attack to come on, and we're gonna be ready to fight it. And Thor's like, yo, what about Earth though? And Odin's like, F Earth. We need to worry about Asgard. That stuff's lost. That's my older brother. He's strong AF, bro. That's what they say in the comics, actually. This is how Norse mythology actually translates to English. Facts. This is facts. So, oh hell no, Odin, exactly. So then Thor's like, yeah, that doesn't vibe with me. And then Odin's like, all right, you wanna be on Midgard? Fine. And he has him seized, and he gets banished from Asgard and sent to Earth. But luckily, he still has his hammer, and he gets to run around and, oh yeah, Thor, I forgot about that. I wrote that in my notes. Odin beats the living crap out of Thor before banishing him. Just absolutely beats the crap out of him. So then, Thor's goal becomes to get the Odin sword Jarnborn, and he gets the sword of Jarnborn. He's like, this is the only way I'm going to be able to beat the serpent, and this is going to be so cool. And he shows up, and he goes to fight the serpent, and it's this big thing. And the other versions of Thor, we got Beta Ray Bill, we've got Thunderstrike, and a bunch of other people fighting people around the planet. And Thor gets Jarnborn, and he goes and fights Serpent, and it's this big epic battle, and he kills Serpent. But because of that, Thor in the prophecy was supposed to die by the serpent's venom, but in killing Serpent also gets a killing blow on Thor, which still kills Thor, and Thor is dead for a short period of time thereafter. Thor dies a lot. Thor gets banished a lot. It's just sort of a thing that happens. But that's the end of that. And then upon the death of the serpent, the other, the worthy as they were called, the people that got the hammers, they are kind of unpossessed, which is super fun. So yeah, there's that one. And then next we have King Thor. So with King Thor, there is a point, once again, when Thor is injured, he typically is the immediate reaction is, I need to go to Asgard to heal because their healing's way better and, hashtag magic. So he typically goes to Asgard, but in this situation, Suture, which is if I recall, it's the giant monster that you see in Thor Ragnarok, that destroys Asgard. So Suture it's a fire giant. He shows up, and while Thor's in Asgard, and he kills Odin. But Odin's able to take him out, whatever, and then Thor has to ascend to the throne. Well, Thor is like, well, I have to accept this responsibility, this is what I have to do, and he gains the Odin Force. This is when he first gets the Odin Force, and the problem with this is he becomes a full-fledged actual god, right? So, Searcher, yes. What did I say? Yeah, Searcher. Yeah. What? That's what I said, right? Anyway, If I said it wrong, it's Searcher. That's fine. That was in chat. Yeah, so, anyway. So, he kills him, and then Thor has to step up to become the king of Asgard. He gets the Odin Force, but the thing is he kind of loses his connection to Earth in a sort of emotional way. He becomes more obsessed with ruling. So with this, he becomes extremely powerful, even more so than normal, and he runs Asgard the way he wants, but then he gets this want to have the people of Earth worship the Asgardians like they used to. So he makes a move on Midgard, he makes a move on Earth to kind of have this situation. Then when you hear Church of Thor, that's where this comes from, is the new, he essentially kind of overhangs over Earth and kind of starts to take over, and there's a big situation where the Avengers are like, yeah, you can't do that, and he's like, oh, I sure can, and he wins, and he takes over Earth and rules Asgard and Earth for 200 years, but it takes him 200 years to figure out what he has done is extremely wrong. So due to, also in this process, he meets, he hooks up with Enchantress, and he has a son named Magni, who is a interesting kind of hero situation in and of himself, so check him out. But after this 200 years, he realizes that he was wrong and in doing all of this, so he goes back in time to his younger self and he stops himself from doing the whole thing. So it's still technically 616 canon, even though it sort of is a branch off of the original universe. So there it is. So King Thor, very, very strong version of Thor. Not the strongest version of Thor, I don't believe, but very close. So definitely looking into that. Speaking of strength, in Marvel Strike Force, they don't really care about power level, but in Frosty Features, we absolutely do. So the way this works, if you are multiversal, you are a threat to reality, as everyone knows it, not just your universe, but all universes at once. You can end the multiverse. Universal means you are a threat to your universe. Maybe end that one, skip over to the next one, and end that one if you want. Cosmic means you are a threat on a planetary scale. You can destroy small planetary bodies, and with enough time, you can probably destroy something like small galaxies or solar systems. Nuclear means you have the power equal to that of a nuclear bomb, which means you can level small cities up to the size of a small planetary body. Super Soldier means you are equal to the power of a human plus in every way, essentially able to level something like a brick wall and up to a city block. That's sort of the range that we're going with. City means you are a person, a human, but you are trained to the absolute 10th degree of a human. You are at the peak of human ability. In Marvel, we see a bunch of our super spies and such that are at this level. Think of people like the Punisher. And then we have Greg. Greg's the undead Asgardian that is spawned by Hela in Marvel Strike Force, and Greg is an undead Asgardian, and with an undead Asgardian, he has the Asgardian physiology put rotten, right? So we're gonna just go ahead and say, for the sake of argument, maybe not entirely true, but for the sake of argument, we're going to say that Greg is equal to that of a regular human. So if I have my trusty dusty foam Thor's hammer and a lot of anger, I theoretically could take on Greg, right? Here we go. Alright, so in the case of Thor, Odin's son, of course he is not going to be Greg. He is not going to be City nor Super Soldier. Nuclear even is pretty weak for this man. We are seeing Thor firmly planted at the cosmic level. There are various versions of Thor, and there are different ways that Thor goes about. Thor ranges all the way from cosmic to multiversal even, depending on his form, but when we see our main 616 situation, he is in the cosmic. He has a universal effect, but his inherent powers are cosmic and can go much higher. We just don't see him use them like that very much, and that is Thor. So back to it. According to Scopely, I already said it, they went straight up off of the MCU. Problems I have, and they nailed it. It's correct, right? It's from Infinity War. But problems I have here are simply that Stormbreaker is not necessarily Thor's main situation. They really blew that out of proportion in the MCU. I mean, that's really it. Ultimately, the character itself is a comic book cop-out. The character is from the movies. They did that on purpose. I can't really discredit them for it, so it's a comic cop-out. Just the character in general. And that is Frosty Features Thor. Thor's been around forever. So please let me know in the comments your favorite Thor moments or situations, fights, etc. He's been around. There's a million things. There's no way one person can like cover him super great in one short kind of video, but I wanted to take a shot. It's really fun to be able to go back and knock out like a character that's been in the game for a while and that everybody knows. So please let me know what you thought in the comments. I really appreciate it. Like, share, subscribe. It doesn't cost you anything but a couple of clicks, and it helps the channel out so much. Also, as a reminder, I stream every Sunday at the link above on Twitch, where we do Frosty Features Live. Also, follow there. Once again, only a couple clicks, people. Only a couple clicks. I hope that you all enjoyed this so much. Please check out the other stuff on the channel. I'm just begging at this point. I hope you all have a fantastic weekend. And most importantly, y'all, stay cool.